Hello and welcome to the Christmas episode of the Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. How do you know it's the Christmas episode of the show? The sparkly reindeer has put in an appearance. Some say he, she, it, them, they is made from the tears of angels mixed with toasted barrel shavings. Others say he, she, it, them, they is actually a cheap plastic thing made in made in Taiwan. All we know is he, she, it, them, they. It's called sparkles. Okay, stupidness over with. when why not? Anyway, before we get on to the Christmas episode of the show, big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented. Before we go any further, just a quick apology that I might have been slightly offensive towards the chairman of In-the-House Distillers. I haven't had any feedback or comeback from that, so I'm just getting my kind of apology in early. Bizarrely enough, I got an email from Gavin a couple of days ago saying a big thank you for all your support and etc. etc. And I thought, I better not send you a link to that episode of the show after what you've just said. So yeah, big apology. These things happen, don't they? Anyway, so this week's episode of the show, as I mentioned probably a few weeks ago, I really wanted to do an episode of the show featuring this. This is obviously the this year's bottling that I selected and had bottled for a certain wine and whiskey merchant, and of course any comments I make today are wholly my own and have no bearing on said wine or whiskey merchant that employs me. But anyway, I wanted to see how it kind of fared with other peated malts. I mean, I don't have enough I don't think I actually had any of the sort of Staoisha bottlings or samples of, so I thought let's just put together a completely random selection of peated malts just to see, you know, how it sits in amongst them. And yeah, so big thank you to everyone that's contributed samples for today's episode of the show. Certainly big thank you to Richard Hall for a certain Icelandic whiskey, which I've been really wanting to try. And I actually did contact the distillery some years ago when it was first released, but never heard anything back from them. And thank you to my good friend in Sunderland for the other couple of samples. Anyway, so yeah, not really an awful lot to say apart from let's just take a look at today's lineup. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off with probably a bottling you've never heard of, because I certainly hadn't heard of it until I got sent a sample of it last year in actual fact. So this is the Angus Dundee Distillers, the Double Peat, bottle of 46%. Can't really tell you an awful lot about it, apart from it is a blend of peated malts from Speyside and Islay. So if I was going to hazard a guess, I would probably say it's got peated Tomintoul and Kalila in it. It's not a particularly expensive bottling, so I thought it might be a nice one to sort of kick off this peat exploration episode, I think. Number two we're going to look at is a bottling by A.D. Rattray. This is a Cask Collection Williamson, or otherwise known as Lefroy. It's a 6-year-old sherry cask 130. Sherry cask? Okay. Pretty much refilled, well-used sherry cask, I think. Distilled in April of 2011, bottled in November of 2017. So it's been sat around for quite a while in actual fact. It is bottled at 61.1%. So yeah, going from 46% to rip your head off cask strength. Then we're going to move on to the Floki, the Icelandic young malt sheep dung smoked reserve, or as we say in these parts, rawr, bit of sheep shit. Bottle of 47%. It's distilled at the. Now I'm probably going to sort of crucify the pronunciation. So any Icelandic viewers watching, please just stick your fingers in the ear. An Enverek distillery. So this is a single cask bottling, and Big thank you to Richard Hall for this. It's cask number 35, and it's spent 12 months in new oak barrels. So, whoa, raw sheep shit ahoy, as they say. Yeah, really looking forward to that. That's because I'm a bit weird. Then we're going to move on to the 1880 collection, the Officers' Mess bottling number 3. So this is the second half of the cask that was bottled last year. Distilled in October of 2003 and bottled in October of this year, so in actual fact it was a 10-year-old. Last year's bottling, as you may recall, was an 8-year-old because it was bottled a month before its 9th birthday. This time around, the bottling company really was really nice and sort of said that they would hold fire until, I think it was about mid-October, I think 10th, 11th, something like that, when it had actually become 10 years old. The only downside, of course, was that I wanted this particular bottling to showcase at the Nottingham Whisky Festival, which was on the 4th of November. So, my God, the timing was bloody tight. And as a consequence, the bottling company wouldn't regauge the cask until it was practically bottled. So, in order to get the labels printed and not have to handwrite the ABV on, they basically said, what ABV do you want it bottled at? The sample that kindly came from Dan at the sipping shed was 57.6%, which is what this one is. So I opted for 57.1 purely because I didn't think it would lose 0.5% in a couple of months, and I just thought that would be just the easiest thing to do, so I could get all the labels done and get it labelled, get it down to us. And literally it arrived the Friday before the Whisky Festival. So, I mean, it was squeaky bum time. It really was. I mean, you know, it all could have gone horribly wrong, but thankfully it didn't. Anyway, so quite looking forward to seeing how this fits in. And if I'd have had a bit more hindsight, I would have hung on to a drop from the previous half of the cask. But anyway, for those of you that are actually coming to the Christmas Gauntleys whisky tasting evening, you will get the opportunity to taste both of them, because I did hang on to a bottle. Maybe I should have just taken a bit, but anyway, doesn't matter. Then we're going to move on to a Longrow cage bottling, nothing like a bit of Longrow. So this is a 10-year-old cage bottling, a re-charred butt, bottled at 58.3%, distilled in November of 2007, and bottled in October of 2018. And the last sample of the day is a lovely old Ardbeg. I just don't get to taste old Ardbeg these days. Cadenheads Cask Strength Ardbeg, 26 years old, distilled in 1993, bottled in February of 2020. A single bourbon hoggy, 53.7%, and you probably had to sell a liver to be able to afford it, one imagines. So a big thank you to Ian for the sample for that. As he said to me, the sample unfortunately isn't very big for obvious reasons. And I said, I don't care, I'm more than happy to have a smidge, as they say. So anyway, yeah. So, if that isn't whiskey of the afternoon, I don't know what will be. But like I said, it was just to basically see how the Staoisha kind of fared in amongst a selection of other peated whiskies. So, without further ado, let's kick off with a bit of double peat then. Okay, so the Angus Dundee double peat. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Peat, quite tarry, lots of sweet heather. It's certainly displaying a lot of mainland peat character. There's a little bit of wood, touch of orange, a little bit of menthol, some iodine, vanilla, a little bit of a coastal note. No, it's actually not a bad nose at all. I mean, it's not sort of, you know, hugely complex, but I think it does what it says on the tin quite nicely. Like it's got the Highland peat character, probably a slightly more of the Highland peat character, but given a little bit of time and, you know, an exploration, certainly the Isla peat character does come through. It's a nice weight to it. It's not overly fruity, but like I said, it's got a nice weight. I don't know what it retails for, but I don't think it's particularly expensive. So, you know, if you're after a sort of a cheap peat fix, you know, not a bad one to go for. Let's see what the pale's like. It's actually a little bit of age at work there, I think. It's not as young and raw as I would expect from a cheap or inexpensive whiskey. Again, kicks off with more of that sort of Speyside kind of peat character. Dried orange, barley, a little bit of citrus, orange, a little bit of orange kind of coming through. A little quite tarry, a little bit medicinal on the mid palate, salty, little coastal note. Tar, peat comes back on the finish. Perfectly drinkable in my opinion. Really nice. And like I said, you know, if you're on a budget, and who isn't these days, apart from at Christmas when we all go a little bit potty with our spending, but you know, if you're on a budget for, you know, an everyday peated drink, or peated whiskey I should say. Right, okay, so let's move on to the AD Rattray Williamson. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Yeah, okay, there is some sherry there. It's not hugely sherried. It's almost kind of Amontillado-y sherry, I think. Quite robust, full, dry peat. Excuse me. Not a lot of medicinal character, not a huge amount of coastal character, so I'm guessing probably matured for the majority of its life on the mainland. It's a little spirity, I will give you that. Touch of earth, there's a little bit of, well, sort of manure. Certainly not sheep dung, shall we say, but it's pleasant, it's okay. It's a like I say, a touch on the young side, a little spirity, but overall I think the balance is pretty good. And certainly for something that's over 60% ABV, I'm not really getting much of a nose prickle, it has to be said. See what the pale's like. You could drink that. That's a dangerous whiskey, it has to be said. Yeah, alright, the finish is a little short, but it really doesn't taste like 60 odd percent, it has to be said. It's quite sooty. Bonfire briquettes, sort of peat briquettes, that kind of, it's like, you know, licking a lump of peat, you know, that's just been in the fire. If you have if you have the sort of like the fetish for doing that kind of thing, I suppose. There's some nice barley there. It's quite rounded again. It's a little not raw but young. Nice intensity. No real coastal character at all. No saltiness. Maybe a smidge on the end. So again, does kind of imply that this cask didn't spend very long at Laphroaig. If any time at all at Laphroaig. Anyway, let's see what nose gives us. A little oilier. There's maybe a little bit of medicinal note. Bit simpler. Emphasises that orange note. It's not a sort of, it's quite a subtle Laphroaig, it has to be said, and maybe it's because it hasn't been sort of matured on Islay. It's kind of almost to a certain extent blunted that sort of overt coastal Laphroaig character. Because I don't think I would have, if I was tasting this blind, I don't think I would have pegged it for a Laphroaig. Let's see what the pale's like. Slight faintiness right on the very finish, a little bit of wet cardboard. I just don't think that had been matured for long enough, to be bluntly honest with you. I think if given another couple of years, that little bit of faintiness may well have been absorbed by the oak. Don't really get any real sherry character at all now that you put a little drop of water with it, which is not a surprise considering it didn't exactly have an awful lot to start off with. I won't go as far as saying it's disappointing. It certainly hasn't blown me away, and I imagine being a Williamson it was pretty expensive. I couldn't tell you how much it was, but you know, I just think that was just one of those whiskies that was just bottled a little bit too soon. Right. Time for a bit of Sheep Dung Reserve. What a great name. Let's see what the nose gives us then. Whoa, mother. God, that's raw. That's young, raw, oily, youthful. Yeah, I can smell that sort of sheep poo. It has to be said. It's certainly not peated barley. It's certainly not sort of peat in the sort of, you know, the traditional sense of the word. It's got an astringency, a herbalness. It's kind of rose petal mild, warm vanilla, amazingly. Kind of underripe banana skin. I kind of get the impression that this is actually quite an estery whiskey to sort of, or got quite an estery base to it. I imagine that if you stripped out the smoke and the poo, it would actually be sort of a kind of Macmyra-y kind of style. But I mean, it's interesting. I mean, here's bizarre. I mean, would you want a whole bottle of it? Don't know. Certainly something to scare your mates with, has to be said. It's not that bad at all. Like I said, it's got a sort of an oily fruitiness. It's young, it's youthful, it's slightly spirity, which is not a surprise. If it would have been me, I'd have bottled the damn thing at cask strength. Why not? If you're going to bottle it at 12 months old, you can go the whole bloody hog. Don't see the point of bottling it at 46%. But then again, it makes it ridiculously expensive. You know, you ship it from Iceland. You know, what's that? About £90 a bottle. £90 a bottle for a 12-month matured whiskey. A lot of people were going to go, "You're having a laugh, aren't you?" But you know, I'm just glad I've actually tasted it. Well, I haven't tasted it yet, have I? Better do that. Let's see what the pal's like. Young, oily, raw, herbal. What was that sheep having for breakfast? That's all I can say. Icelandic grass, one imagines. It has a slight decomposed grassiness, it has to be said. And again, that sort of interesting smokiness. Potpourri, herbal fruits, oily, young, short, intense, fainty, fun. It has to be said. Not something I'd want to drink all the time, but you know, I'd be interested to see where that's at sort of 3 years of age or something like that, because maybe some more of the fruits would have come out. But it's got a nice, interesting smokiness, it has to be said, and it's not as manure-y as some whiskies that I've come across. But so yeah, interesting stuff. Right, okay, time for the Officer's Mess bottling number 3. As you can see, I don't know whether, well, you can see from the label, because I had remember the issues I had with the powers that be not liking the old label, I went for a complete and utter redesign, and you know what? I don't know if you can see that, I think that's come out really well. I'm really chuffed with how well that label actually came out with, because I wanted it obviously printed on clear substrate so that it, you know, looked as it did, and of course, you know, I did the design on Photoshop and it looked really good on that, but of course you just don't quite know how it's going to turn out when it's actually printed. So yeah, really happy with how that turned out. Anyway, onto the nose. Fuller than I remember. It seems to have put on a bit more weight. It's still got that lovely crisp white fruit, minerals, barley, malt, almost a honeyed note as well. Maybe not as intensely peated. touch of lime, a little bit of manure, green pepper. Don't remember the green pepper notes from the original bottling. I honestly think this has actually developed really well. I think it's better than the first bottling, and that's not just because it's a 10-year-old. I just think it's just developed a little bit more. Maybe being half a cask, more cask interaction with the spirit, because it seems like there's a little bit more vanilla than I remember. Touch of soot, lemon. Really complex. I thought this was just a stunningly good cask, it has to be said. Sad to see it bottled now, because I'm going to have to find something equally as good next year, but we'll worry about that next year. Let's see what the pass like. Again, I'm getting that green pepper, that capsicum note. Earthy peat, lovely crisp white fruit. Again, quite full, some lovely balancing vanilla, a little bit of lime, touch of bog myrtle, some herbal notes. A little masked, obviously, but it's got a lovely mouth-watering finish. The oak kind of comes back along with some slightly sootier peat. And some sweeter peat as well. It's got a lovely sweetness to that peat. Oh, I like that. I think that is a seriously impressive whisky in actual fact. I think that is actually, out of the four that I've just tasted, I think this is showing really, really nicely. And a lot of people were saying that, you know, certainly at the Whisky Festival, that it was the best bottling that they'd tasted there on the day, which was nice. I don't fully believe everybody, considering some of the array of whiskies that were on display. But anyway, let's see what a little drop of water does. That really brings out that fruit, almost kind of Alsatian white fruit, sort of peach, pear. Less peat now, silky, soft, a little bit more vanilla, a little bit more honey as well. That's a fab nose. I mean, I'm just so stoked that I got to bottle this and put my name on the label, because, you know, I love it. I think this is great. Let's see what the power's like. That's a lovely finish. Again, more Alsatian white fruit, sort of peach, pear, white apricot, apricot as well. A bit of salt, some lovely sooty peat, lovely lingering aftertaste. Yeah, okay, it was $75.95 retail. It's expensive for a 10-year-old, I'll give you that. But you know what? I'm more than happy to sell you that. And talking of selling you that, I had 100. There was 100 bottles basically remaining in the cask, so obviously I got those at the beginning of November, for argument's sake. I think there's about a dozen or so bottles left now, I think. So if you really want one, get your skates on, order one, and we'll get it shipped out to you, and hopefully get it shipped out to you before Christmas, so you can enjoy that after your Christmas Christmas fair, as they say, because Okay, so let's move on to the 10-year-old Longrow. Let's see what the notes are on this then, shall we? Oh, that's woody. I mean, you can see from the colour, that's picked up an awful lot of character from colour from the wood. Charred wood, kerosene, earthy peat, cherries, tar, fish, bit of Campbelltown funkiness, but not too much, nicely balanced. But I'm just getting this sort of like a real nose full of kerosene, that has to be said. It just stinks of kerosene. But there's a nice underpinning woodiness, oakiness, vanilla, almost kind of fresh oak. Well, I mean, I suppose being recharred, it would sort of almost be fresh oak. Not bad at all for a Longrow. I mean, as we know, Longrow can be quite variable, but this, yeah, like this. Let's see what that's on. My God, you can taste the alcohol on that. I mean, that's bizarre. The Williamson is over 60%. Can't taste the alcohol at all. This is 58%, and you can taste the alcohol. Oily, fishy, briny. Again, kerosene. I mean, you can really taste that charred wood. I mean, that charred wood is just there on the mid palate. A little bit of barley, more kerosene, a touch of Campbelltown funkiness, earthiness, peat, earthy, sort of fishy peat. It's a hell of a mouthful, it has to be said. Little bit masked on the finish, which is not a surprise. Very subtle sort of marmalade-y orange note kind of just coming through right at the end. A good bottling, a really good bottling of Longrow. Really intense, really earthy, really woody. Just everything you want about a Longrow in my opinion. So yeah, it's filled out the nose actually. Just tempering that alcohol has given it sort of more barley character, more richness. It's got almost a sort of mature-ish kind of Campbelltowny kind of nose now. Less kerosene, less peat, more kind of Springbanky kind of character. A little bit of citrus. Yeah, it's pretty damn good as far as I'm concerned. Let's see what the pass on. Like the nose. Less funk, less peat, more Springbanky kind of character, more barley, more fruit-ish. Still quite fishy, good length, coastal. Lovely sort of, I wouldn't quite say green pepper. Obsessed with the capsicum. It's got a sort of a slight astringency, a green astringency, green fruit, just right at the very end. Lovely complexity, it has to be said. Great bottling. And finally a bit of old Ardbeg. Definitely looking forward to this. Don't get the opportunity to taste old Ardbeg very much these days, so let's see what the nose gives us. It's actually quite light by Ardbeg standards, quite light, quite briny, quite fishy, in a more coleillery kind of style than a sort of a woody Ardbeg style. Barley, white peach, burnt wood, vanilla, toffee, bog myrtle, marzipan, cognac-y kind of dried apple. Filling out quite nicely. It's getting kind of weighty as the oils develop quite nicely, but it still has this lightness to it, which is sort of unusual for Ardbeg. I kind of expect more weightiness with Ardbeg, and more woodiness. This is kind of almost in a more kind of, like I say, a coleillery kind of style. Bloody gorgeous though. I mean, and the peat is just so delicate and wispy and slightly medicinal maybe. I mean, frankly, that's a stunning nose. I mean, that is a stunning old Islay. I mean, whichever way you look at it. And like I said, you know, it would probably cost you a kidney to purchase this bottle, but who needs a kidney anyway? Let's do the pass one. Stunning, absolutely stunning. I mean, more classical Ardbeg on the palate, that sort of oily, weighty woodiness, burnt wood, brine, mature cognac-y dried fruits, dried apple, touch of tar, some citrus, lime, lemon, brine, bog myrtle. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, like the finish. I mean, it is seriously complex. Lovely sort of slight woodiness on the aftertaste. I mean, you know, a lot of people criticise Ardbeg for sort of being a bit loud and a bit shouty, and the other and expensive. But frankly, they make great whiskey at the end of the day, and sometimes you just kind of forget about all the noise, all the clutter, and if you get the opportunity to taste some old Ardbeg, sometimes they are just sublime spirits. Like I said, I mean, I was expecting that to be whiskey of the afternoon, and it did not disappoint. It was frankly stunning. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Before I do, obviously, if, as I expect, this is the last episode of the show for 2023, I would just like to say a big thank you to everybody that's watched every episode, that's liked it, that's commented. I just really appreciate your interaction with the show, and you know, that's what keeps me doing it, because I love my whiskey. I love talking about it. You know, some people may well find some of the things I say a little bit unpalatable occasionally, but you know, I've always wanted to sort of speak the truth as I see it about whiskey, and you know, if I think it's a crap whiskey, I will call it a crap whiskey. Obviously, I would rather call it a good whiskey than anything else. But anyway, if I don't see all of you guys before Christmas, I mean, I might have the opportunity to do one before the end of the year. I don't honestly know, but if I don't, have a lovely Christmas, and I hope sort of you get some cracking drams in your stocking, as they say. So anyway, back to this week's episode of the show. Angus, Dundee, Big Peat. Big Peat. Oh dear, I've just insulted them, haven't I? The double Peat. Oh, for God's sake. Yeah, had too much whiskey. Peat on a budget. Absolutely perfect. Nothing wrong with it at all. Can you really go wrong with peated? Well, you can go wrong with peated whiskey, but I mean, that absolutely fine. The 80 Rattray Williamson, bottle too young, a little bit fainty, maybe not quite sort of complex, certainly not particularly coastal. Again, kind of giving the impression that cask spent practically zero time at Lefroy. Doesn't really matter at the end of the day, but just not a bottling I'd kind of really warm to. The Floki, I'm really glad that I got the opportunity to taste that, because it was fun. It's something, I wouldn't want to drink it all the time. It's young, it's raw, there's an element of sort of astringent herbal sheep poo there, it has to be said. But I think, you know, I would be intrigued to see that 3 or maybe a little bit older, and just to see where that's kind of gone. The Gauntleys 1880 Staoisha, yeah, I mean, you know, really complex for a 10-year-old whiskey, it has to be said. It developed lovely over the course of the last 12 months, and a really big thank you to Dan at the Sipping Shed for selling me the second half of that cask. He could have bottled it himself because it was bloody good, but you know, he allowed me the opportunity to bottle it and treat you guys. I know a number of you have bought it, and like I said, if you really want a bottle, get your skates on and get it ordered, because there ain't an awful lot of bottles left, it has to be said. So, and I would just like to say to everybody that's purchased a bottle of that, I really appreciate your support, and it makes me feel all soft and fuzzy inside. The Longrow, yeah, lovely Longrow. Really nicely intense, nicely Campbelltowny, well balanced, lots of that charred oak character, but it didn't kind of overwhelm the character of the spirit. And the Ardbeg, well, you know, you really hope that sort of an old Ardbeg is going to sort of deliver the goods, and well, it delivered the goods. So yeah, very impressed. So I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the show. I hope you've enjoyed all the episodes of the show from this year. Obviously next year I will hopefully carry on entertaining you guys, and well, we'll just see what happens over the course of the 12 months. So like I said, if I don't see you before, have a great Christmas, a lovely New Year. I hope you get some great drams gifted to you. Certainly if your other halves or friends have come into the shop and said, I need to buy a bottle of whiskey, I hope you'll be impressed with the selection. So until next year, all that's left to be said is good afternoon and good dramming.